And we wonder why we're looking at the news and we see kids being beat to death in the middle of the street. We see people ripping babies out of a woman's womb and stealing it. And we're going, what in the world is going on? And we think we've come up with a better way. Nebuchadnezzar thought he had it solved. And then we go to Daniel 2, 3, 2 through 5. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officers to come to the dedication of this image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officers assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then he heralded loudly, proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, zither, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." All nations, all the captive groups that this kingdom owned has now been summoned, representatives to represent these countries before Nebuchadnezzar. They have no idea what this is all about when they get there. But they have been summoned before the king. And now he's going to disclose to them what's going on. And this had to be an enormous, this probably was one of the biggest days in the history of Babylon. Here's this golden image, the king, all this stuff that's going on. You can imagine he's pulled out all the stops on this one. And he's pulling these people in. They just, well, what are we here for? We're here for a party? You know, what's the deal? It's all good. We're having a big time. Where's the food? Let's celebrate. Well, all of a sudden, something starts to happen. He's got the music playing. He's got the beat going. He's got these drums going. You can just feel the rhythm. He's got it going. Because what happens with us in music? Music stirs the emotions. Especially if you get the right kind of rhythm, the right kind of sounds going, you stir, you get fired up. You know, we get fired up. Some people, the only reason they come to church is to hear the choir sing. Sometimes, the only time they come to church is to hear, especially the children's choir sing. You won't see them the rest of the time. They won't be there. Especially if you start preaching God. Now, you start talking about the Bible and God, they're out of here. But you let the kids come in and sing, and then they wonder why their kids move away from the faith so early, because what do they see as an example? But hey, music stirs them, so we get involved. And Nebuchadnezzar understands the importance of music. And music, it says in Ephesians 5:19, "Speak for one another with psalms," or to one another, with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. "Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord." Colossians 3:16. "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God." Of course, much of the music that we have today infiltrating the church is all about what? Pleasing the flesh. Well, listen to that sound. Let's get away from the old hymns, those old hymns. You know, where you had God mentioned, Christ mentioned God and worshiping Him and all this. Now you get music that has the word I in it more than it has the word God in it. But this music stirs us. I've seen some of these programs. I went to a church just visiting around. I went to this church and they spent 45 minutes just pumping it up. Music, all this praise, praise, the drums, just praise, and everybody's getting, they're getting the emotion, they're getting fired up, they're getting stirred up. And then the pastor comes out, and they're all emotional and hyped up, and I'm going, how long does that last? How long does all that stuff really last? When they walk out of that door, do they even remember what the preacher was talking about? Was the preacher's message as watered down as the music? We're living in this turmoil, this crazy time we're living in, and yet we have the weakest in terms of what goes on in the church, the involvement of the church, the involvement of pastors, the involvement of lay people. What are we doing? Are we not engaged? We've got one of the largest sex trade networks in Charlotte, North Carolina. Serves as a major funnel between Atlanta and Washington. huge sex trade. The average life expectancy of a child that has been abducted in the sex trade industry is 4 years. They'll live 4 years once they've been pulled into the sex trade. But do you hear anybody talking about it? When was the last time you heard anybody in the church talk about the sex trade that's happening in this state? 2.5 hours from where we're at right now, we've got one of the largest, the East Coast hub of the sex trade is right here in our state. But do you hear anything about it? No. So we've got these things, we're pumped up with music. And music is one of those things, look back to where music says in Genesis 4:21, Jubal, the godless son of Lot, or of Cain. It says his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play the harp and flute. Interesting. I didn't realize that, where it all started. Isn't that interesting? But we understand that, music is there, and if it's used correctly to lift up God, to worship and bring praise to Him, and not just to stir up this excitement and emotion that is not based on God and worshiping God, but it's catering to the flesh. That's why so many churches in the old days would not allow drums in their services, because the rhythm that's created in the drum has a very intoxicating effect upon humans. It can send you into a mental state. I mean, this is why if you go to a lot of places that worship, all these weird gods and all this stuff, they have a lot of drum rhythm stuff, and it's because it can send you into this super hyper emotional state. Now, the reason I say that is Nebuchadnezzar is doing this. This is what he's doing. You want to see where the church is moving to? Look at some of the things that are happening in the church. Nebuchadnezzar is using the same stuff. He's using the same stuff. He's getting them all fired up. Now, not until the people were assembled did they really know what's getting ready to take place. Once they are there, Nebuchadnezzar sets this thing up. It says, with his knowledge of human nature, Nebuchadnezzar was too astute to ignore the religious part of man's being. Man is intuitively religious, and something inside him longs to be stirred. This desire responds more readily when the object of the worship is man. Wow! Look at what we do in this country. Who do we worship? Every, high-dollar sports star, every high-dollar movie person. We have exalted man to these unbelievable levels where people will fall down in hysteria and faint at the sight of these individuals. They become so obsessed with them. They follow them everywhere they go. We've got people that have left everything in this positive in life to follow bands all around the country. Somebody was telling me a story about a young person that got involved with following this certain band, and she got caught up in it. Next thing you know, she's in Betty Ford in rehab, trying to gain control of her life again. I mean, it's just intoxicating, some of the things. So, Nebuchadnezzar understands this, so he's like, okay, they got to worship, we got to stir this religiousness in them. We got the music going now. We have this golden image that represents him. It represents Babylon, the great accomplishments of man. So we see this happening. And he's going, you are that head of gold. 2:38, chapter 2, verse 38. He says, now you've got to honor this God, this image I've created. You honor this image, you honor the state. You honor the state. You are honoring Babylon. Remember that as we go through this. Remember that honoring of the state.